Well, hello, I'm here with Caitlin and Liz, and we're going to talk about LastPass, among other things. But first, virtual animals.
Yeah, so this was an article in Tech Explorer today about a game called BitPet, and it sort of operates on the same premise as Pokemon Go, but these are virtual pets that you walk, and the object of the game is to get you out and walking around. And it's kind of funny because I was just out and walking my actual pets in the rain. I mean, I don't have a need for this because they'll just destroy my house if I don't walk them. But for folks who don't have a pet, or for kids who can't have a pet, maybe it's kind of a cool idea.
Yeah. Is it fun? Is it popular?
Apparently, I mean, it's still in the I think it's still in the testing stage. But it's a pretty cool we'll see how it goes after the launch.
All right.
How does it differ from Pokemon Go?
So the main difference is you can just kind of pick it up and put it down, Pokemon Go. But if for this game, if you don't walk your animals and care for them, they do not do well. You got to keep them alive. It's kind of reminds me of Neopets from back in the day, where you gotta feed it and care for it and do activities with it, like taking on walks. So
Yeah.
that's the main difference.
All right. Well, I found a nice article on The Verge about LastPass that kind of summarizes everything. There was a long Mastodon thread on it. This article by Mitchell Clark goes through it. So LastPass was hacked months ago, and they downplayed it and said the criminals didn't get much of anything, but it turned out that that was a lie. The criminals did get the ability to get people's vaults. So now they say the criminals have stolen people's encrypted vaults. And they say, that's all right because we are a zero knowledge company. We don't have your password. But the problem is that is very far from true. They don't actually encrypt everything in your vaults. They don't encrypt the URLs or other metadata or your IP addresses. That's all in plain text. They only encrypt a few fields, like the password fields, with a password derived with a key derived from your passphrase. And the technique used to derive that key is considered old and antiquated. It's 100,000 rounds of PBKDF2. And so they're making a big deal out of it. People are getting more and more upset with LastPass and saying that they let people use really old passwords, like 8-character passwords, if you have an old account, and that they don't respond well to vulnerability reports and all the usual stuff. So a bunch of people are getting really fed up and say you should switch to something else. Bruce Schneier came out and said you should switch to the one he made. So I'm a LastPass user, and I'm awful reluctant to move. But the one thing I really need to check, they say, is that your LastPass may have saved password reset URLs, and those might still be valid. And those are not encrypted at all. So you really need to check and see if you have those. And I haven't done that yet, but that's probably a thing to do. So it might be worth moving to a different one. I'm not convinced it's worth the bother yet, but more and more hate is being dumped on LastPass. So it might be wise to move to something else if you can. Anyway, then Caitlin has got a bunch of stuff about the political consequences of depression.
Right. So after January 6th, I was very curious about where these conspiracy theories come from and what we can do to prevent this type of thing from happening again in the future. Now, like most people, I thought, well, social media, radicalization, people have these radical views. And obviously what we need to do is, go on to social media and make sure that people aren't radicalized. Well, it turns out that there was actual science done. And of course, because I was just speculating, I was totally wrong. This is not why people get radicalized or go on to political violence. Like maybe they do get radicalized by going online, But that does not translate into any sort of political violence, which is very interesting. So let me share the main article here, which is, and I have a few articles we're going to go over. We're going to go over the science of like conspiracy theories, but let's go over this one first because this is the new one. So it's the political consequences of depression, how conspiracy beliefs, self-efficacy, and depression affect support for political violence. This is by Matthew Baum, James Druckmann, and Matthew Simonson, Jennifer Lim, and Roy Perlis. And so if we look in the PDF, their conclusions are this. So they said, interestingly, and this is their direct quote, ideology, which is coded says that higher values indicate more conservative respondents, does not have a positive effect on support for violence, nor does being a Republican or Trump supporter. So you can be totally radicalized and not go into political violence. But what they found is that depression and conspiracy theories are what cause people to go violent. So it's very much much more of an emotional state as well as a mental health state. So if you are depressed and you believe in conspiracy theories, well, then you are much at higher risk for engaging in any sort of political violence. Now, depression we know a little bit about because there's been a lot of studies on what causes depression. However, there hasn't been a whole lot of studies done on the cause of conspiracy theories, which brings us to my next article, which is connecting the dots. Oh, go on.
Before we go on to that,
Yeah.
Something that comes to mind when you mentioned that was that, this happened January 6th, right? And seasonal affective disorder is a serious problem, especially, in a lot of red states just due to geography. And it'd be interesting to know, it'd be interesting to kind of consider maybe that whether that had a hand in this or not, and that it's during the time of year that that's probably worst for a lot of folks.
Well, I really want to make it clear that depression alone does not lead people to political violence, right? That like if you get seasonal affective disorder, that doesn't mean you're going to become a violent person. And one of the things we need to discuss, if we are going to discuss, mental health and how it relates to, political violence, is we have to be aware of tropes like the violent, mental health stuff. That just because you have a mental health issue does not mean that you are necessarily violent or even prone to violence. And what we really need to keep in mind here is that the political violence seems to stem from both conspiratorial thinking as well as a down mental and emotional state. So you have sort of your violent emotions combined with conspiratorial thinking together. And this is what seems to cause political violence. And that can happen during the summer, the winter. And of course, seasonal affective disorder is a thing. A lot of the people, of course, that were rioting have like economic issues, which play into depression. But I really do want to focus more on the conspiratorial thinking, because this is very interesting, because we don't really see it as we kind of know, wink, wink, nod, nod, that people who believe that like 5G and everything like that have something going on in their brains, but we don't know what it is. Well, some studies have been done. In particular, I'm going to look at the European Journal for Social Psychology, which is this article called Connecting the Dots, Illusory Patterns, Perceptions, Predict Belief in Conspiracy and the Supernatural. This is by Jan William van Prugen and Karen M. Douglas. Thanks, Karen. And Clara de Inocencio. I want to give them credit. This is their study. I'm just, reading it. Basically what they did is they took participants and they did coin tosses, and they said, random coin tosses, do you see a pattern? And people who were more likely to believe in conspiracy theories saw patterns when there were none. But that's not enough. That is not enough to say, hey, this is what's going on. So they went further. They did a whole bunch of studies. They not only did like the coin toss, they did coin tosses in different ways, but more interesting, they also showed pictures like of paintings. So some of them were very organized paintings. Like we have, I don't have any links. I don't know where the links are to the paintings, but they had like, random abstract paintings versus like cubes and stuff like that, which is very geometric. And they would ask subjects like, hey, do you see patterns in this? And everyone said, yeah, we see patterns in the, geometric, paintings of squares and everything like that. But when we look at like a Pollock, for example, the people who are very conspiracy oriented see patterns where there are none. And so what this seems to suggest is that conspiratorial thinking is part of a lack of pattern awareness or pattern recognition, as I say, maybe it's like too much pattern recognition where they're making a bunch of false positives and seeing patterns where there are none. And so that's where a lot of these conspiratorial thinking comes from. I mean, certainly, yes, you have people who are, just plain, not very bright, the people who think that the earth is flat because there's no way water can stick to a ball. Okay. Yeah, those people exist. But the vast majority of people who, are conspiracy theorists do so because of their inability to construct or recognize patterns or lack thereof compared to the general population. And furthermore, there's also a link that shows that unfounded beliefs are linked to dopamine availability, in which we also pointed out that depression in the first article is a major factor in this violence. And so the other thing we have to look at is that not only is this pattern recognition an issue of just cognition, but also of dopamine availability. So this is another article. There's a lot of people here I want to give thanks to. That there's Katharina Schmack, Hans Rosler, Maria Sukowitz, Eva J. Brandt, Daniel Mueller, Predag Petrovic, and Philip Sturzer. So anyway, so this article once again talks about conspiratorial beliefs, but also once again links it to lack of dopamine, which also causes depression. So there's a very real physical cause within the brain, neurologically, that's causing this pattern recognition, and it is tied to depression. And of course, depression and conspiratorial thinking is, what leads to political violence. And what I really hope these studies show is that we need to start taking people who believe in conspiracy theories very seriously, because they have a mental health issue that is dangerous, right? Like, it's not just that they are wacky. Like, you have people with like autism and they're just neurodivergent, right? Like they're not hurt anybody. They're fine. But these people who believe in conspiratorial beliefs do pose a risk to society. They do pose a risk to others. It comes to mind, for example, that there are the conspiracy people that believe that, for example, the COVID-19 isn't real and that you shouldn't take the vaccines. And a lot of people died because of these conspiratorial beliefs. And it's not just going to affect the people with this pattern recognition stuff going on. If you're not an expert and someone you trust greatly comes up to you and says, you should not, take the vaccine because it'll hurt you, and you're not like a vaccine expert, you don't know anything about it, but you trust this person, then, it sort of leaks out and affects other people. So like I said, what I'm really hoping moving forward is that we start treating, when we see someone who starts exhibiting conspiratorial beliefs, that we start taking it seriously. Like if we saw someone who is, talking to themselves or hearing voices, we know that they need, to see a professional right away. And I would really like to see the same thing happen for people that, start going off on conspiracy theories, because there really is something going on that, in their mind that makes them neurodivergent, but also is maladaptive to not only themselves, but to people around them.
But not necessarily in every case. I think that's part of the issue, that yes, there in some instances it absolutely can be dangerous, but then I think that there's some pretty innocuous ones too, like some of the alien related ones and stuff like that, where, okay, yeah, they're conspiracy theories, but they're not really that harmful to anyone. So, I mean, I think just like anything, it's a spectrum.
Well, if you
Yeah.
start about helicopters and guys to drug them and stuff, you're just gonna make them crazier, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the thing in my experience is that usually when you have somebody talking about like UFOs or that the moon landing wasn't real, that's usually a precursor, to something further down the line that is very dangerous. Like, yeah, certainly you have beliefs that aren't going to necessarily hurt anyone, right? Like you have people who believe in, there's a lot of people who believe in like magic cures, which do hurt people. So I don't want to use that as an example, but maybe you're just superstitious or something.
Or that they think that let's just say they think the government has, did alien autopsies and stuff like that and keeps, where it's, okay, yeah, it's maybe not, maybe it hasn't been, maybe it's not maybe it is a bona fide conspiracy theory, but it's not, they're not, because of that, they're not looking for to participate in a bloody coup or anything like that, or tell grandma not to get the vaccine or whatever.
Like I said, in my experience, when you see somebody falling down one conspiracy rabbit hole, that usually leads to more conspiracy rabbit holes. So maybe one isn't that particularly dangerous, but we really do need to treat it like something serious. Because currently, as it stands right now, if people get into conspiracy theories like QAnon, which is absolutely dangerous, they get into conspiracy theories like, and like the water conspiracy theory, where you drink water with a little bit of something in it and it like heals you. I forget what that's called, or they believe in like anti-vax. And that's really dangerous. Because it puts the population at risk, and it puts themselves at risk, and people have died because they believe in these conspiracy theories. But we sort of treat it like, oh, they're free to do whatever they want. But we don't say the same thing necessarily about people who are like schizophrenic. So like if people hear voices and the voices are, even if they're not, because one stereotype of schizophrenia is that the voices are quote unquote evil. That is not the case at all. Sometimes the voices are friendly. But even if it's not causing them a lot of, the people with schizophrenia, even if it doesn't cause them a lot of, trauma, to hear these voices or whatever, we still say, hey, maybe you should, see a doctor about this. But we don't do that for anyone, regardless of how conspiratorial they are. And I would like to see that happen, because that seems like the only solid way we can sort of prevent that sort of political violence from happening again in the future, is to make sure that these people are getting, properly, treated. But we don't. We don't do that at all. We just treat it like normal, or we treat them like they're just silly or they're goofy. But the fact of the matter is that they are neurodivergent in a way that can cause harm to themselves and others around them.
Yeah, well, it seems awfully difficult to do anything when you have freedom of religion and freedom of speech, which seem to cover having any crazy idea like this and saying anything you want about it.
Right. Like I said, we need to change. I think these studies show that we need to change our attitude about how we treat, conspiracy theories. As Liz said, yeah, certainly if you go down one conspiracy theory and you think that, and it's a conspiracy theory, right? Like let's say you're interested in alien conspiracy theories, but it's a conspiracy theory. You don't think it's actually real. Yeah, certainly that's fine. But when you actually believe things like the government is, doing secret things on aliens and secret experiments on aliens, I mean, something's going on. And that combined with other mental health issues is what leads to political violence.
I think that can be true, but I think I just listened to way too many years of Coast to Coast with Art Bell. It just, some of that stuff is, I think some of that stuff is just sort of entertaining urban legend or urban folklore for a lot of people.
And I've been into miracle healing services and the speaking in tongues and everything. I think you can't get within a mile of this in America without violating freedom of religion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, I mean, I think Sam brings up a good point, is that there are, like I said, one of the issues with this is that those conspiratorial beliefs don't just affect people with conspiracies, with that conspiracy theory mindset. If you trust somebody greatly and they're an important person in your life, they're a religious figure, for example, they can influence you, even though you don't have that same conspiratorial mindset. They can convince you to sort of follow along in their
like
in their
faith,
beliefs.
and then their kids suffer.
Yeah, like
Because-
Alex Jones. Tons of people believe him. But the thing is, in order to finally punishing him, but they punish him when they can show that he actually lied, knew he was lying, and hurt people. It's really hard to punish people for speech. It can be done, but only when you go way, way over the line.
Right. I'm not talking about punishing people for speech. I mean, the thing we have to remember is that these conspiracy theorists, people believe what they're saying. And if what they were saying is true, they are absolutely right to go out there and scream from the bloody top of their lungs that, the US is being overtaken and children are being smuggled and everything like that. The thing is that they're not. And we just sort of ignore them. But the fact of the matter is we need to be treating them with more compassion and giving them more services and recognizing that what they're doing is not just them being goofy, but something sort of deeper.
Well, what kind of service can you offer somebody in QAnon is convinced the government is killing small children and Democrats are drinking their blood? I mean, the only service you could offer them is to forcibly lock them up and pump them full of a drug or something. And that's what I think you can't do. I don't think there is any intervention that will do anything while they're believing that stuff.
I mean, ultimately, it does have to come to them to go, seek help. But people around them, people they talk to, can suggest it, and they can say, "Hey, maybe you should talk to someone about it." And just like we would like with anyone else that might be having some other, cognitive based,
I think part of the issue is
I think that's happening in everybody's family now. They got QAnon relatives, and everybody knows they're nuts, and they're just sort of shunning them.
Right. They're shunning. The other thing is they're shunning themselves, because part of the issue is that folks who are struggling with those issues often tend to reduce their circle of contacts to a straight up echo chamber because they don't want to hear it. And if you say anything contradictory to whatever it is they believe, if you challenge those beliefs in any way, then and as far as they're concerned, you're part of the problem.
Yep. Yeah.
Like I said, they really do believe what they're saying.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think we as a society need to show these people more compassion. Let's not, shun them. Let's not just be their kooky. Like we really need to come to the realization that something's going on physically in their brain that is, making them unable to recognize where there is and isn't patterns. And they become, social health issues, essentially.
Well, if there isn't any drug or cure, it's not clear what good that information does you.
Well, like I said, I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't know if there is a quote unquote cure, the same way that there's no cure for, like I said, I go back to like schizophrenia. But no one would say, let's, maybe we shouldn't tell these people to go see a, professional about this, but we do when it's people who are deep in conspiracy theories. We say, they're just goofy. Let's leave them alone.
Yeah. Well, if there are anything that professionals can do. Well, anyway, let's go on to Liz, who's got smart toys.
Yeah. So, the last thing that I talked about was sort of a wholesome thing for your kids to do, to walk their virtual pets around and get some exercise and virtually take care of them. This story, not so great. Hopefully you did not buy any children in your life, any of these toys for Christmas, because we've talked about this before. It's not a new thing that toys can be essentially spying on your children. But that still is, those toys are still continuing to hit the market. And you know, this story references a parent who bought her daughter a toy called the Fuzzable Friend. And who would think that something called a Fuzzable Friend might be spying on your children? Well, it was this toy essentially was integrated with Amazon Alexa, and that was one of the selling points for it. Well, turns out that toy could collected all sorts of information on the kids, including generating transcripts of anything that the children said around the toy, which is pretty concerning. So just your reminder to check over toys that your kids may have gotten for Christmas, and look at especially if they have any kind of connectivity features, maybe check those out and do a little research into them.
Yep. I think Disney was selling toys like that at one time, which is really a black eye for them.
Yeah, well, several manufacturers have. I think Mattel has, and this is not a conspiracy theory. That's kind of one of the other issues with that, is that sometimes you'll end up in a situation like that. As security professionals, a lot of the time we'll have encounters with folks who believe that there is some massive conspiracy against them, or they're being spied on, or they've been hacked or whatever. And most of the time they're completely off base. There's nothing going on. This is all just in their heads. And I thought one time that this woman who'd been referred to me as a client, I thought, well, this is just another one of them, because she said stuff to me like, I think my TV, this is going to sound crazy, but I think my TV might be spying on me. And I'm thinking, that does sound crazy. You sound nuts. But it turned out her TV was spying on her in the end. So every once in a while, you will get somebody who you think is really just completely bought it hook, line, and sinker into conspiracy theories, but they're actually not nuts. They're definitely the exception rather than the rule, by far, though.
All right. So I found this article at opendemocracy.net that talks about the Epoch Times, and I've seen the Epoch Times all over the place on campus and everywhere. It's huge. It goes in many languages and all over the world, and it's the voice of Falun Gong. And I remember 20 years ago, I heard on Berkeley, everybody talking about Falun Gong, and it was really sort of a harmless Buddhist type meditation religion in China. And the mean old Chinese government was abusing them, but the Chinese government regarded them as dangerous subversives. And it is interesting to watch how they've gone full MAGA in response to Donald Trump, because Donald Trump was against the Chinese Communist Party. So they decided to support him. And then they're heavily anti-vax and just more and more crazy stuff mixed in with their articles. And so they did a deep dive trying to figure out why they went so nuts. And it turns out that there's just one leader who just pushes them to take certain positions in general terms. And there's a bunch of unpaid or poorly paid staff that are just throwing articles in by going to like right-wing blogs and just copying and pasting them in and say, we don't have any way to verify them. We don't even try. We're on a deadline. They're just throwing in stuff from sort of QAnon sites. So it's interesting to see, because a lot of people take this seriously. I know I hear Morning Joe always talking about it, how his relatives keep sending him articles from the Chinese cults, which is what this is. So it's
I thought Epoch Times was a right-wing publication. I did not realize that it was I did not realize there was a Falun Gong connection, but yeah. I knew that I have relatives that send me stuff from there, and I'm like, oh, okay. I thought that they were involved with like PragerU. I thought they were an offshoot of that.
No, they were set up by Falun Gong, by starting out in Chinese and then spreading out, and they're really trying very hard to reach a lot of people. And it wasn't always so right wing, but that's where it's ended up. But it certainly is the source of an awful lot of disinformation right now, because it looks like a serious paper. It's just got a lot of completely false stuff mixed in with the good stuff.
That's pretty wild. And I mean, we see, especially here in the Bay Area, we see all the time there's just a constant barrage of advertisements through mail, TV, radio, billboards. I get snail mail spam about it for the Shenyun dancers, who are a arm of the Falun Gong. And it's interesting, that it seems like I don't see all of the. I think that they tour, but I don't see. I don't know if the onslaught of advertising as heavy in other places as it is here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I heard a lot about it a long time ago. Anyway, it seems to be very influential on the right. And so Caitlin has got the drone deliveries. I saw this one.
Yeah, no. So it's actually happening. I wasn't sure if this was actually going to go anywhere, but Amazon is finally, according to Ars Technica and Eric Bangman. Anyway, Amazon for a long time now, I remember years and years ago, said, we're looking at drones to deliver stuff. And it never came. And I'm like, there's so many FAA regulations and so much has to go on. I don't think it's going to happen, but apparently it's going to start happening. And obviously it's just in a few select areas. Like I said, because there's so many FAA regulations. So the maximum payload will be 5 pounds. And this is what it looks like. It's a octocopter, so there's 6. No, not octo. It's a 6 septocopter. Anyway, it has six props, and it'll come drop stuff off at people's homes. If you live in the small communities of like Lockford, California, which has 3,500 residents, which is near Sacramento, and also they're going to be looking at the about a place near Texas A&M, I think is what they're talking about. So yeah, opening in Lockford, California, and College Station, Texas. And College Station is just near Texas A&M University. Now, this is not fully automatic. There will be people piloting the drones from afar. And we'll see if this is any better or any quicker than or cheaper for last mile delivery. Last mile delivery is one of the hardest parts of shipping because it's really easy to take 10,000 widgets, put them on the boat and ship them to one location. But then when you have to distribute those 10,000 widgets to 10,000 customers, that's where the logistics gets all ridiculous and you go to UPS and stuff like that. So, this is one of those last mile things. We'll see if it works, see if it doesn't. But I'm glad to see this getting off the ground. I do like fast deliveries. Yeah.
I like your skepticism of whether it's going to work. I know the automatic checkout counters seem to be just a total loss. They don't save money. They don't save time. And I wonder, these drone deliveries might also just be a loss.
They absolutely just might be a loss. I mean, and this also assumes people aren't going to vandalize them. I mean, they have to come and drop stuff off. And if they hit someone, like I said, it's going to be human controlled, but that also leads to human error. And if there's like rain or wind or something going on, obviously they can't do any deliveries. We'll see how this goes. We'll keep an eye on it. And the FAA, of course, will be very interested to see how this goes.
Maybe they could incorporate some of their, defensive attack drone features for, combating porch pirates.
Yep.
Maybe. The other thing too that occurs to me is that when you take off in a commercial plane, you have to go over the systems completely. So if you've ever been on a commercial plane, you'll know it lands and then takes over an hour to have the crew come out. They'll inspect the entire plane. Sometimes even the pilot will get out and do inspections as well. They have to make sure that the flaps work and that there's nothing in the engines. They fill it up. They check the engines themselves. They check the oil. They, check the bathroom, cleaner stuff too. Everything has to be spot on before it lifts off. And normally drones, if you get it as a toy, you can just take it out and lift off. But if you're doing commercial stuff like this, it also occurs to me that there's going to be a huge overhead if they have to sort of inspect every drone before takeoff and after landing. So yeah, I don't know if it's going to save a lot of money, but it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it'd be simpler things like just shooting your stuff out of a cannon to land on your lawn. But anyway,
Yeah, that would be awesome.
I always think of like Blade Runner, where you have these thousands of flying things supposedly going through lanes with flying cops trying to hunt them down. And everything. Anyway, all right. And so Liz has got the DHS, a scandal about DHS.
This was kind of an amusing story. It was actually funny, but not funny. But I think it's just all the more reason for them to hire some of our brilliant students. So this was pretty bad. And there's a story in the Intercept by Sam Biddle. And apparently Homeland Security is not performing very well in their security audits because they have a really poor track record so far, and their most recent one showed that they haven't been revoking former employees' access cards despite having been warned about it for the last 15 years. So somebody gets fired, their physical site access card should be deactivated immediately, like as soon as they're terminated. Most places are pretty scrupulous about that. You get locked out of everything, your access card no longer works, etc.
Yeah.
Well, not the government. They are just haven't been disabling access. So
That's a really serious flaw. This was one of my jobs when I worked at for private sector. I would disable accounts while they were being walked back to the back room to get fired. You know, they didn't mess around.
Yep. Or sometimes I've been in a scenario of that, and where they tell you hours before so that you can start getting all the accounts ready, and you can't tell the person like, hey, you're about to be fired because you're sworn to secrecy.
Yeah, that's the way it should be, because rogue insider is very dangerous.
Yeah, well, somebody should let DHS know. That's a bad.
Well, yes. Well, anyway, everybody's excited about the chaos at Southwest. I was flying around recently, but not on Southwest, thankfully. But New York Times has a nice summary of it all. And it's interesting because Southwest is responsible for almost all the airline cancellations. All the other airlines recovered by like Wednesday of this week. Southwest didn't recover at all. They still haven't recovered. And they said there's several reasons for that. One is they didn't upgrade their computer systems, and they don't actually have a way to communicate with their pilots. They have to call them one by one, and they say they even have to send people to physically run through the airport to reach them to communicate with the pilots. Another problem is, until there was a time, until maybe 10 years ago, where planes were forced to have single hop service to all these small cities. And they switched to allowing them to switch to hub and spoke, which is why you always have to transfer in like Chicago or Atlanta. And almost all airlines moved to the hub and spoke system, which is extremely more efficient. Like you can reach 9 cities with just 8 flights, but if you want to connect 9 cities point to point, it takes 54 flights the other way. And Southwest still does it without hub and spoke. And that means, of course, people love it because you have more nonstops. But the problem is, it means your pilots are scattered to all these small cities, and your steward, wait staff and everything. And so when there's like weather emergency and you can't get them back, you can't do anything about it. You can't get them all back to the central location where they would be. And that's what happens to them. And the other thing is, for some reason, Southwest has failed to make partnerships with other airlines. Most airlines like Delta and American and everything have a deal that if our flights get canceled, we can move our passengers over to you guys. And Southwest does not have those. So when all their staff was scattered all over the place, they couldn't get them back anywhere. They had to cancel all their flights, and they couldn't do anything about it to save the passengers. So they've had thousands of their employees and passengers just stranded for like a week over Christmas in some place they don't want to be. So they're in a world of hurt now. And they're going to have to pay fines and reimbursement, and the government's going to step in, and it's a big mess. It's interesting. It's not just as simple as an IT failure. It's a pretty large system failure at many levels. So anyway, we're going to be hearing a lot more echoes of that. Supposedly Southwest will be restored to normal service by like the day after tomorrow. But that means all kinds of people spent the whole week, Christmas and New Year's, stuck somewhere or spending thousands of dollars trying to get back some other way.
Apparently there were massive IT failures though, that was a major contributor.
They say that we managed to do a lot of things wrong. Yeah.
There's an interesting article in the Register about that.
Yeah. All right. And the last one is another form of theft that Caitlin's got.
Yeah, so apparently someone saw Office Space and thought, that's a good idea. I'm not entirely sure how this came about, but there's an article here on KOMO, KOMOnews.com, written by Jeremy Harris, news reporter for KOMO. So a Seattle tech worker decided to essentially, so there's this movie Office Space, which we should all have watched at this point. We all know Office Space. In the movie, these people, the main characters decide they work for like a banking transaction thing, and they're going to take like a few cents off. They're going to round off every transaction and pocket the money into their account. And someone saw that movie, and in the movie, they all get in trouble and they're all thinking, oh, we're going to go into federal prison and all this stuff. Someone saw that movie and thought, oh, that's a great idea. I should do that. So a software engineer stole about $300,000, a lot of money, doing this exact same thing. His name is Hermenildo Castro, of 28, lived in Tacoma, and basically did exactly the same thing in Office Space. So he was taking a little extra during purchases made by the employer and putting it into a personal account. So like, you know, if you made some purchase and shipping cost was like $10, maybe a few cents would go into his personal account. Not exactly sure on the details. And apparently there was a whole bunch of other stuff going on too, where he'd buy a whole bunch of products that he had access to and, you know, wouldn't pay for it, et cetera, et cetera. And when the police came, they had the criminal had all these boxes, and cybersecurity got involved, which is how they found him. It's a good case of cybersecurity doing the right thing, finding these bad actors, catching them. And basically this person ruined his entire programming career for nothing. He could have made a lot more than $300,000 over his lifetime had he continued doing just programming, but somehow he saw Office Space and thought, you know, I'm going to do that.
Yeah, this tends to happen. Amateurs, you know.
I guess he didn't see the end of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, there's so many people that got into tech because they see it, that's where the money is.
Yeah.
That it creates this atmosphere where you do have people here who don't want to be here. And it just makes me so sad because there are a lot of people who working in the industry who, if they could, would throw their computer in a ditch and live in the woods for the rest of their lives. And it's like, why are you in this field in the first place? You know, if you want money, you know, there's less stressful and less annoying ways to do it.
Yep. Yeah, a whole lot of people seem to end up in some bad job that they just want to like burn the place down and leave.
Yeah, it's like elementary school teachers who seem to hate small children. It's like, why are you doing this?
Yeah. And you know, some people get disgruntled even as college teachers, amazing though that may be.
I can't imagine why that would happen ever.
Yeah.
But, you know, even though they may get disgruntled as college teachers, you know, I know at least for some of those folks, it isn't the students or the material that's the issue. It's the administration, which is something that I heard for years and years from teachers and never really fully grasped until I entered the teaching profession.
Yes, it is impossible for anybody in the private sector to believe that it could continue at this level of dysfunction. All right. Well, that's it for this one, and we'll probably have another one on Tuesday, although I'm traveling, so the time is a little bit random.